So when you give rationale, it's very difficult for the human brain to immediately say no. It makes them think. And once you're making someone think, that means you're moving ahead.
Hello and welcome back to the Superlawyer YouTube channel. We are pleased to welcome Aditya Singha sir today. Sir is an independent counsel and advisor with more than 10 years of experience in transactions and strategic advisory. As a graduate of NLU Delhi and holding an MBA from INSEAD, he has provided counsel to global organizations including IKEA, LinkedIn, Daiichi, and Amazon. He now leads his own practice, integrating legal expertise, transaction structuring, business strategy, and corporate finance. So focuses on collaborating with entrepreneurs and key decision makers, offering guidance on complex issues and strategic mandates, often required a nuanced understanding of various facets of law and business. We welcome you today, sir. My name is Anshi, and I work as an associate with the Superlawyer team. At Superlawyer, we showcase inspiring journeys of legal professionals, offering valuable insights and motivation to our viewers as they navigate their own legal career. Thank you so much for being with us today, sir. I'd request Divya ma'am to now please continue the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Anshi.
Thank you so much for bringing in this interview first. And thank you, Aditya Singha ji, for being here. It has been an amazing profile that I went through. I hope you enjoy this interview. I'm Divya Divedi. I'm team lead at Superlawyers, and I also practice law at Supreme Court of India. And I enjoy that particular understanding of technology, law, and business. I hope we'll bring in a lot of intriguing topics today and also understand how a hardcore lawyer from NLU Delhi moved on and did MBA from INSEAD with a GMAT score of 740. Amazing, amazing day ahead. Thank you so much once again for being here.
Thank you so much, Divya. Looking forward to a great conversation.
Let's start with the very, very prominent question of how did you decide to become a lawyer, and then how did you decide to become an MBA as well, and that too by scoring a staggering score at GMAT of 740. Please do enlighten our learners and us as well.
So I'll be very honest. I never even dreamt of doing an MBA when I was setting out to becoming a lawyer. But luckily for me, I was born in a family where my grandfather was a lawyer. And that also, he wasn't a lawyer throughout his career. He became a lawyer after he retired from the government services. So he was a civil lawyer. But you would imagine that a lawyer who would take care of disputes of people, who would take care of disputes for companies, he would have a lot of people coming into the house. So very early on from my childhood days, I would see people come to him for advice, for assistance, even people who used to stay near our society. And I would always see them come with a sense of hope, a sense of gratitude when they would leave. And that feeling that there's one person who could give people that hope, that guidance, and that comfort that they need at a time which is probably very traumatic for them or very difficult for them was something that I took very closely. So I wanted to become a lawyer from a very early age. Secondly, I also enjoyed reading a lot, so that went in my favor because I realized that a lawyer's job is to constantly update his or her knowledge, constantly keep on reading. And I enjoyed reading. So I felt, okay, this is another avenue where I think I can enhance those aspects about me because I also loved to read and I love to learn more. So I really wanted to become a lawyer right since I think I was 10 years old. And I never really took up any law coaching as such. This is going to do a segue into my GMAT score. So I actually studied for the engineering entrance exams. And I got a decent rank in the AIEEE. I got an extended list in the IIT as well. But I never wanted to become an engineer. Engineering was always, for me, a backup option. And once I got a good score in CLAT and then subsequently a score in IELTS, which allowed me the admission into National Law University, Delhi, I think it was a slam dunk for me because A, it was Delhi. B, it was led by Professor Dr. Ranbir Singh, who had basically propped up Nalsar to become one of the best law schools in the country. And I was genuinely excited about being one of the earlier batches of this institution, which thankfully today continues to be one of the best in the country. So for me, law was always a very clear path. I would say corporate law was not really that clear of a path. It was only during my time working with different law firms that I developed a fascination for law, for corporate law rather. And when I joined my first firm, I realized that there is a lot of excitement that I find helping businesses navigate challenges. I would say that is effectively the mantra that I followed. What do I want to be? I want to be someone who helps companies, businesses, entrepreneurs, founders solve challenges and help them on the path to growth or to avoid risks from harming that business or harming that proposition. So that's pretty much how my journey started. For my MBA, honestly, that's a whole other answer. I never imagined that I would do an MBA. I never imagined I would go to INSEAD for my MBA. But yeah, I'll be happy to discuss that once we want me to discuss it.
We would love to discuss that immediately because obviously a
Okay.
lawyer who definitely had prepared for engineering, but he chose to become a lawyer. And how did you change that particular understanding while you were preparing for GMAT? Because GMAT is a
Hmm.
very specific examination where you have to be precise and you don't have to write like we lawyers do. So, how did you change your understanding of that, unlearn that, and relearned, and then did this?
Good question, Divya. So, first, the rationale. Why I wanted to do an MBA, and it sort of permeated from me setting up my independent practice. So once I set up my practice, I started engaging more with young founders and entrepreneurs. And because my penchant was for helping founders and entrepreneurs grow, it required me to deep dive into business and operations with them. I had to understand how they run their business. So I had to develop an understanding for business models. I needed to understand how they generate revenue and how they spend that money. So I needed to develop an understanding for both accounting and corporate finance. And then I needed to understand what's their next step. So one example I can give is I was advising a blockchain company back in 2021, and they wanted to develop a very unique synthetic trading portal on the blockchain. Now, there was nothing similar like that existed either in India or anywhere that we could find. And we needed to create a structure that would comply with whichever laws were applicable in India, because there was nothing that was uniquely identifying how this business would work. So, helping that founder create a regulatory or a compliance focused business model made me realize that there is a lot more value add that lawyers can bring to companies and to founders because of our unique understanding of how regulations work and how they are applied, because of our understanding of how impact can be created, how value can be created, because we've seen other founders do that. So we can effectively leverage all of that exposure and bring to founders not just from a legal perspective, but also from a business perspective. So all of these things combined, my mind started working as to how can I add more value to these founders, to my clients effectively. And I realized that, yes, I do have some form of knowledge or I would say experience, but that's all secondhand because that was gained through interacting with C suite level executives or founders. But there was nothing concrete that I could rely on to help advise these founders. So that's when I started researching a little bit more about how MBA colleges work, what's the value add that a person like me could get, how we can enhance that and leverage what experiences that we've had in our past. And that effectively started the train journey and the momentum towards giving the GMAT, identifying INSEAD as a potential opportunity, applying for INSEAD, and then getting through. So that's how that trajectory went. In terms of specifically for GMAT, I can condense it very quickly. Yes, there is a lot of unlearning that needs to happen. You're absolutely right. There is a lot of effort that one needs to put in understanding how to solve problems. So the idea is, as Indian students, a lot of us have a predictable set path in which we solve problems. And when I say solve problems, they can be both quantitative and verbal problems. But the GMAT is one exam where the strategy is whatever way works, arrive at an answer. And that's key in a service industry that relies on a lot of data that one has to analyze, synthesize, and then replicate to a client in a manner that the client understands. So the GMAT is effectively what you learn in an MBA school condensed and ensures that you have that knowledge ready so that you're not lagging behind in an MBA. So there was a lot of unlearning. There was a lot of relearning of how do you strategically and tactically approach specific questions. And there is a lot of practice that needs to go in. I think what people forget is it's not about how much you know in a GMAT. It's a question of how much you've practiced in that kind of environment because it is a very intense examination. So my example is when I was giving the exam, there were COVID regulations for the admission centers. So we had to give the exam in a room with our masks on. We could not take our masks off, except probably, I think we couldn't take our masks off at all. We didn't have access to anything, including water. So it was very strenuous because you're stressed about the exam. There is a ticker that keeps on going. So you have to take care of the time. You have to make sure that you are answering the question. And if you leave a question, you cannot go back. So there are a lot of these permutations, combinations outside of just the pure knowledge that you have. So it requires a lot of practice simulated in an exam environment. And I think what worked for me was I pushed myself to simulate that exam environment regularly. And of course, I had the benefit that because it was my own practice, I could identify time slots every day in which I could practice. But I think regularity and being serious about what you have to do, that's the simplest way to achieve a good GMAT score.
Wow. So with your independent practice, you also managed to crack this particular exam. Given the fact that you did this particular MBA in time of COVID, and there were a lot of understandings which have changed during this course of time because of COVID-19. How did you see that this particular understanding of management helped you build better practice after you have completed the management course and the understanding which you had prior to it? Because you must have done some comparative analysis about that as well, if you don't mind sharing that.
That's absolutely the perfect question because that is the one question I tell a lot of potential applicants who are in the legal field who want to do an MBA. That's the one point I ask them that ask yourself, why are you doing this? What do you hope to gain out of this? Because an MBA is very customized, I would say. It's a very bespoke course because you'll get a lot of information and a lot of that information is probably available at 1/100th the cost. The question is, what do you want to derive out of that experience? So I can say personally for me, there were a few factors that were very critical, which I feel I can leverage today after having completed it. The first and foremost, and this goes well for most international MBAs, first and foremost is the network. At INSEAD, there is a rule that a particular nationality cannot be represented by more than 11 or 12% of the cohort. So it is by rule that you will be interacting with people from a variety of different geographies, different backgrounds, different experiences, and you are forced to be in that situation. When I say forced, it's by nature of the groups that are set, the sections that are created. You're constantly interacting with people whom you probably may not have anything in connection with prima facie. Like in my group, you would not have another Indian and you would not have another lawyer. You would have people from completely different backgrounds. And I think that helps in two ways. Number one, after you graduate, your alumni network is probably one of the strongest in the world. So you can basically look at the alumni directory and you'll find the who's who of any industry. So you know if you are stuck somewhere or you need assistance somewhere, you have an alumni base to rely on, and it's one of the strongest components of INSEAD. Second, you also develop an understanding of how different perceptions can approach different problems. Because when you're given a problem as a group, as an analytical Indian lawyer, I might solve it in path A. Someone who works in the renewable energy industries, who's only worked on offshore drilling, they look at that in another path. Someone who's worked in hardcore finance, hedge fund, or investment banking, they look at that same problem maybe in my direction, but a different path. Someone who's an army vet, a marine operative, they would look at it differently. So when you're interacting with so many different people trying to solve a very similar problem, you start getting an understanding of how different people think and what their rationale is for thinking. And when I look back, that helps me also tackle challenges that my clients face in different ways in which I would have never thought. Because unfortunately, a lot of lawyers are caught in this bubble of thinking in a very pedantic and a very straight cut method. That usually doesn't happen in an MBA because you're dealt with problems that span different industries, and therefore you have to rely on different ways of thinking. So the mental models, the thought processes, the approach, I think that also helps you understand problems from different lenses. And the last, another important takeaway for me was how do you value the output more than the process? Because ultimately, as a service provider, whether you're a consultant, whether you're a banker, whether you're a lawyer, ultimately your goal is to resolve challenges and solve issues for your clients and do it in a way that they can trust you with their work going on. There's a very important saying that one of the professors said that you know that you're a good service provider when your client calls you up for help that is outside your core service. For example, if a client calls you up and says, "Hey, Aditya, can you tell me the name of a good pediatric surgeon in Delhi?" That means they trust you for things even outside your core competence. And how do you develop that trust is what we learned. How do you build processes that help you create that engine that gives them what they want? So that was my takeaway. And that's what's helping me optimize and make my practice more efficient, more driven towards solutions rather than process, which may become an obstacle for client service.
Wow, that kind of trust built on a lawyer by a client is something which is not only inspirational but look forward to, because what the takeaways that you have told, they are very different perspective from obviously usual litigation or usual lawyers who are doing it with the perspective of serving the client, but not with a lot of solution providing, because there is not a possibility of providing that kind of solution, which you said that if someone reaches out to you for a pediatrician or a doctor in an area which you are not equipped, that means you have earned their trust and they have given you their trust. So is it that kind of trust that you already have handled so many ranges of multi-million dollar high stake deals as well? I assume it is because of that trust only. If you don't mind sharing any story or any case where you found the transactions very complex and you found solutions to those kind of complexities which were not easy for anybody practicing the similar legal arena, and the kind of negotiations that you have gone through because of your understanding of law, because of your understanding of management as well, because both of these things serve the corporates and business owners and entrepreneurs in a different manner. So if you don't mind sharing any
Hmm.
story that had a higher challenge and you found a solution for it.
Sure. So I think the first one in terms of a complex deal, I think the most complex deal that I did was one of the biggest deals that I did in my independent practice. It was an acquisition of a logistics company from a listed company. So we were acting for the acquirers. And safe to say that I had gained the trust of my clients to the extent that they would trust me with almost a 150 crore rupee deal in the listed company space. And what I realized later was this was going to be an uphill challenge because, unlike any other deal that I had done, even in my law firm career, this one required me to have a strong understanding of not just basics of M&A and transactional law, but also accounting, about how business operations in this industry work, because I had to sit with the client and understand the implications of what the negotiations were going to be, because ultimately those were to be reflected in the transaction document. So having that kind of interaction first with business, then with finance, then trying to understand how those interplay with the legal clauses, and then drafting those clauses, and then negotiating with a company that has probably a battery of lawyers that are assisting them because they're a listed company. So that was very, very challenging. And it was complex transactions primarily because there were a lot of payment driven issues because it was effectively a carve out of the listed company. They were carving out a business and we were acquiring that business. So, how do you create that delineation from now this belongs to us and whatever remains is yours? How the accounting for that is going to be done? And even if there is an agreement on how it's going to be done in practice, ultimately it's my job to put it on paper. So doing that, and this was before my MBA. So I did not even have that kind of a formal understanding of how finance and accounting work. I had a bare bones understanding back then, but it forced me to continuously interact with my client and understand what is it that they're looking for. And I think this is the biggest learning I can give to anyone who's advising clients on M&A. Understand what your client wants out of this transaction because not every deal is the same. People have different expectations from that transaction, and your job as a counsel and an advisor is to understand what that requirement is and then put it on paper to either ensure it happens or to protect so that it doesn't get taken away. So that deal for me was very challenging because I did not have the assistant. I had another senior lawyer who was working with me, but I needed to understand tax, accounting, employment, labor, and transactional work all on my own. So that was challenging, but very rewarding because we ended up having a very successful deal. To your second point about interesting negotiations, very interestingly, after my MBA, one of the deals that I had negotiated was against my earlier firm, where I negotiated with one of the lawyers who I mentored back in the firm. And having that kind of interaction with him, trying to recall and leverage all the business side elements of what I wanted to protect for my client and interacting with him on that point was a very good learning for me. And it was a very, I would say, smooth process because I could also see that and I was very proud of the fact that he also came at me with very logical arguments. And this is another very important point because if this is going out to other lawyers who are in this profession, one thing again that you have to realize is please, whatever arguments you're making in a negotiation, number one, be very well prepared with what you have to say, why you are asking for what you're asking, and anticipate what the counterparty might say, putting yourself in their position. Because a lot of time, the only argument you're giving is this is market standard, this is what we want, without giving a rationale. Then you're effectively moving yourself back from the negotiation table and you're making it break down. So, another very important aspect that I learned, especially for negotiations, is that you really need to put in a lot of effort, a lot of work to support what you're saying, why you're saying, and why it makes sense. Because at the end of the day, your job is to ensure that there is a solution that works for everyone. You cannot drum things down on the other side, unless, of course, you have leverage. But most times, when parties are at an equal footing, you need to come with solid arguments, but also help the other side understand look, this works for me and it also works for you because ABC. And what you're suggesting doesn't work because of DEF. So when you give rationale, it's very difficult for the human brain to immediately say no. It makes them think. And once you're making someone think, that means you're moving ahead. So that's a negotiation strategy that I deployed amongst the other things that I learned. But one thing that I felt very happy about was I could see that what I had learned almost entirely was being replicated by someone who I basically helped and who's now a very accomplished lawyer in his own right. So I think it was a good negotiation, and that's the reason why I remember it so well.
Wow. So when you are talking about these kind of challenges and the way you apply logic or the analytical skills that you have garnered over the years of practice, as well as after doing your MBA, how has that helped you bring in a lot of clients who are either founders of startups who are looking forward to having fundraisings and structuring? Because all of it requires not only legal knowledge, but analytical knowledge along with logic and where to apply, when to apply, and why to apply. So all of these things you are not doing only after MBA, you have already done it. And law obviously is a very logical thing. So how do you do it? How have you strategized your career around it? Because you said that earlier when you started doing law, you were not that inclined towards corporate laws and businesses, but you found that appeal in that. So how did you train yourself in doing these things analytically and logically?
I read a lot. Like the simplest answer is I read a lot. I put myself in situations where I was forced to be the one doing the grunt work. So, one example that I can remember in the first firm that I worked at, we had probably one of the best corporate law libraries that I can think of because there were books on M&A and transactions that I don't think a lot of law firms in India are likely to have access to. So when I had access to that, and when I had access to one of the best corporate lawyers in the country, I was as inquisitive as a young child could be. And I would always read up on different transactions. I would read up on how contracts are framed. I would read up on what best practices are in, let's say, the United States or United Kingdom. I would read case laws on my off time. I would review transaction documents that were signed by the firm 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So for me, once I became interested in the business of transaction law, and in general, any subject for that matter, it's not just law. I put myself in a situation where I find whatever I want to learn about it, I try and learn. And now it's become 10 times easier because now all research requires is a simple prompt. So I think research has become easy. But at the end of the day, it's about reading the full, let's say the full article or the particular chapter in a book. So for me, how I developed this is just through reading a lot and also talking to a lot of lawyers. Whenever I did a deal with someone who I felt was doing things that I didn't understand, I would not hesitate and talk to them and ask them, hey, why did you say that? What was the point that you were making in this particular argument? Why was this so important? And you'd be surprised that a lot of senior lawyers actually genuinely appreciate junior lawyers coming up and doing that. So I would urge a lot of lawyers, especially those in law firms, to never hesitate in going up and talking to your senior associate or a principal associate, asking, why is this happening? And this is also a very important point for potential leaders, whether you're becoming a senior associate or you're a PA or you're becoming a partner, that whenever you're delegating work, it's imperative that you explain why you are doing and what is it that you are expecting from them. Because what it does, it enhances their comprehension of the problem statement, and it also ensures that they're very focused on what it is that they have to do. So for me, developing that thought process was both as a learner and as a, I won't say teacher, but as someone who was guiding young lawyers or interns. And constantly having done that, it became second nature to me that whenever a problem statement comes in front of me, there are immediately aspects about that problem that I understand. Okay, this is what the fact pattern is. This is the trigger point. These are probably the interests that the client needs to solve. One of the first things I do is when I have a mandate, I will always talk to a client and I'll always understand what is it that a successful outcome looks like for you. And that is something that, again, I see a lot of lawyers floundering on. Because even before the MBA, that was what I did. And after the MBA, this is what I learned, that a successful advisor understands what the client needs and sometimes also helps the client understand what they need. Because at times they're not probably equipped enough to frame what they want. So that's your job again to guide them, to be the Gandalf for them in a way, that you're mentoring them and advising them in a way that helps them also understand what is it that is most viable for them. So it's just constant interaction, constant updation of your knowledge, just being hungry for understanding things, and all forms of communication, whether you're on WhatsApp, whether you're email, whether you're talking to a junior or a senior, have clarity in what you're saying and understand why you're saying what you're saying. in a way, it'll become second nature to you. At least that's what happens to me.
So you being avid reader and you being inquisitive and questioning your seniors and without hesitation questioning, how has that helped you become a nice and very approachable mentor? Because what I understand from your profile that you also have mentored a lot of legal entrants who want to aspire similar kind of career path. How was that helpful? Because you learned and then you started making people learn. So how is that mentoring coming up? How do you feel after you see that your mentees are going ahead and having big names working around? What kind of advice do you give? Have you got any checklist or anything in your mind which you can
Mm.
share with our learners as well so that they can grasp at least some nuggets out of it?
Excellent question. And I'm very passionate about this, so I'd love to talk more about this. One, how I started, again, my inquisitive nature made me always question everything. And it's not just in law firms, it was even at home. Why is this way? Why is this that way? And because I had a background in science, it was always that questioning, why does something happen? And unless you understand the why, you're never going to understand the process itself. So you need to know why something happens. There has to be a reason behind it. And that prompted me to be very inquisitive. Based on that, I spoke to a lot of people. Sometimes I would be shooed away. A lot of times I would be given a patient ear. And also, in a way, because I was instrumental in helping firm up the internship strategy at one of my firms, it made me interact with a lot of interns. And throughout that journey, I realized that, look, interns also come to a law firm with the expectation of learning. They are not just there as law students who are expected to do a lot of grunt work or research work. They also have an expectation from the law firm. And I learned that having interned in one of the best law firms in the country, a couple of them, in fact. And there I got a sense that you understand what work goes on in a law firm, but there is also that learning that happens from some of the senior lawyers, which is absolutely incomparable because they know how things work in practice. What you're studying in law school is a lot of academic knowledge. So it was my role that because I got that, I have to give it forward, and I enjoyed doing that. I enjoyed speaking with interns one on one throughout my time in all the law firms that I work with, and even now. Now, the question is how I do it. Again, it's a very similar way to how I work with clients. My first question to a lot of them is I needed to understand, why are you here? Why are we talking? What is it that you hope to achieve out of this? There are people who come asking me for advice on how do I manage, toxicity in the workplace, which is unfortunately a very important topic, but it's very prevalent. A lot of people ask, I want to shift from a law firm to in-house. How do I do that? First question I ask, why? What's problematic in that law firm? What is it that you have identified that you cannot work with? If someone asks me, okay, I'm a lawyer who's doing disputes, I want to go do an MBA. My first question is why? Have you asked yourself why you want to do this? Is it the money? Do you want to do law? Or do you want to do law with that understanding? So the way I talk to students, mentors, young lawyers is first I ask them what their motivations are. So it's sort of like helping them drill down in their own mind. What is it that they have to speak about when they come to me? And my role is mostly to help them realize what is it that they want and then give them my understanding with a very clear caveat. I am not a counselor. I am not a career guide, and I'm not, let's say, an MBA coach. I can only tell you what worked for me. And there is nothing to say that what worked for me will work for you. So please take what I say with a pinch of salt. But what I can tell you is the principles that I applied, they are very likely to probably be in your favor because the principles are very straightforward. Have clarity of thought, understand the motivation behind any action, whether it's speech or whether it's written. Understand the implications or have an idea of what the implications of those actions would be. And then, if you're okay with the implications, then go achieve that outcome in a strategic manner. Understand what is it that you want to do and then lay out a plan of action. Don't just go headfirst into a situation and then say, I'll take things as they come, because that's inefficient. And one thing I keep on telling people is law requires you to be efficient because at any point of time, you're juggling five things. So if you're not efficient, you are bound to drop the ball. And the best way to not drop it is to have some sort of structure, some sort of, I would say, in a crude sense, an SOP that if a project comes, then I do ABC. If X happens, then Y is the outcome. So while it takes time, the moment it gets crystallized, it becomes a very standard operating process for anyone. It then just becomes like a program. Once something comes, you know the path that you have to follow. So your brain is then only focused on exactly the substance, not the administrative process around it. And that helps a lot of people realize their own value, their own way of working. Some people work visually, some people work through reading, some are more analytical than the others, but then they find what truly is that they want. And that's when it's more of a eureka moment for some of them. Obviously, not everyone has that, but that's my path. It's not spoon feeding, it is effectively helping them understand who they are, what is it that they want, how is it that they can do that. I can help you create a path to it. But what you want to do, that's up to you. And it applies everywhere, whether it's professional or personal, whether it's within the law or outside the law.
So, navigating through all of this, how do you balance your mental health and physical health both? Why I added this is because I really want to understand for our learners that many a times we have this thought that we have to work extra hours in order to meet some deadline or anything, but then that affects your physical and mental health both. How have you worked towards balancing that? And along with that, we would like to also understand when you were talking about your actions, plan what you want to do, you'll have to schedule it. You'll be the only one who'll be deciding factor of planning how to do it. So what are your plans for, let's say, next couple of years? Because obviously within a decade you change from a lawyer to an MBA as well.
Mm.
So how do you now foresee your career or your practice going, and how do you want to take it forward? And our learners will definitely love to learn that, and obviously balancing the mental and physical health.
Again, Divya, that is such an important point. And again, I can speak on hours for that because that is such an important aspect that I've realized. Unfortunately, a bit later in my professional life, but better late than never, in my view. So I cannot stress how important managing your mental health and physical health is, especially in a career like that of law. I don't think I need to go into the details of why it is important. I think it is now an absolute truth that you need to maintain every aspect of your body, whether it's the physical body or the mental body. You have to, if you want to lead a life that you are content with. There is no question about it. And I think that's pretty much a given. How to do that is a major point. And one thing I felt in my own life, even without having maybe the knowledge that I do today, is I could take care of my physical health because I wanted to. And right from the day I started working, in fact, a year before I started working, I made sure that I make it a habit that I do some form of physical workout every single, maybe 4 times to 6 times a week, continuously. And once it became a habit for me for, let's say, over a month or 2 months, if I remember correctly, then it became an indispensable part of my daily routine. And I think that's what's most crucial. Once you make something a part of your routine, then it becomes something that you don't need to think about. Yes, there is that initial inertia that prevents you from doing things that you know are important. But that's where actual growth is, that if you push yourself through for a short period of time, once it becomes part of the routine, in fact, you feel the other way. So there was this period of time where I was undergoing some physical issues where I couldn't go to the gym. And I genuinely felt that I was missing out on something during the day because it feels that once I work out, once I come back to work, I feel motivated and I feel invigorated that yes, I'll work. So a physical workout of any kind, whether it's running, walking, yoga, going to the gym, swimming, any form of physical exercise that elevates your heart rate, makes you sweat a little bit is, I think, very crucial for not just your physical health, but also it has an impact on mental health. And when it comes to mental health, there is this saying that everyone should meditate for 20 minutes a day, except when you're really busy and when you're really stressed. In that case, you have to meditate for 40 minutes a day. And what people don't realize is the value in that statement is so deep that unless you do it, you will not realize it. And meditation doesn't mean that you have to go to an ashram and meditate like a sadhu. If that works for you, great. But meditation is effectively calming your thoughts. It's not like having no thoughts, but mindful meditation, the one that I follow, is just having comfort in that whatever you're thinking is okay and you're letting it pass without judgment. Simply put, giving yourself 15 to 20 minutes a day, anytime during the day, where it's a lot of calm, where you're not worried about the next message or the next meeting or a call that's supposed to happen. The impact that that period of calmness has on your day, and if you do it for a period in your life in general, really helps you also become a better lawyer. And I'll give you an example. There are a lot of times in a lawyer's life where during negotiations, things can get very heated. And I have seen lawyers lose their cool on conversations. So, one thing I felt after I started meditating is that my reaction to a lot of unnecessary verbiage that's thrown in a negotiation is much lower. I don't react impulsively anymore. And what that does is it not only shows that you're the bigger person where you're keeping your calm while the other person might be shouting, but it also shows your client that you're confident about the path that you're following. And ultimately, if your client sees that confidence in you, then that means you're doing something right as his or her advisor. So it's not just about feeling good yourself. All of these things actually also help you become a better lawyer as well. It helps you deal with the stresses that the life of a lawyer will inevitably throw on you. It is a given that a lawyer's life will have stress. There is no escaping that. Anyone who thinks otherwise is deluded, or they're probably practicing law in a way I have never seen. But stress is effectively in the nature of the legal career. And the only way, you don't wish for stress to go away. You learn to deal with it and you learn to manage it. One of the best ways to manage it for me works out to be meditation. So I think it is absolutely critical.
Thank you so much for bringing in so many amazing aspects to this particular conversation, where you also talked about how to manage your mental health with meditation and other aspects. And one should always be mindful of what they are doing and what kind of profession they are. It has been an amazing conversation. I personally have learned a lot of things, and I try to understand from this conversation for our learners as well. So Superlawyer team is absolutely thankful to you for carving out this much time and giving us such a beautiful conversation where we can understand different variety of aspects as a lawyer and as a management grad as well. It has been a pleasure for us. Thank you so much for being here. Amazing, amazing interview. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Divya. And I'm so grateful for both you and Anshi reaching out to me and having this conversation. I'm very grateful. Thank you so much.